Hey everyone, I'm Ido. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at Blockaid. Today I guess we're going to talk about Web2 versus Web3 security and how we're working to secure the most adversarial environment we think on the internet. So just to give you an overview about Blockaid, Blockaid works with some of the biggest companies in the space today, companies like MetaMask, OpenSea, Coinbase, and others. We've raised money from some of the biggest investors in the space, maybe even in the world. And our team comes from traditional cybersecurity, primarily kind of the Israeli cyber intelligence units, right? So my background, my co-founder's background is in finding vulnerabilities in some of the biggest operating systems, browsers, and cryptographic implementations in the world. And over the past 2 years or so, we've been working, like I said, with some of the biggest companies in the space to protect their users from various different threats that are taking place on-chain. So, like I said, we work with some of the biggest companies in the space, one of those being Consensus through our work with MetaMask. And they've gone and constructed an independent report that went and showed that over 47% of consumers that interact with the space, or actually don't interact with the space, don't do it because they're worried about too many scams. And that worry is very much justified, right? Crypto, as we said, is overwhelmingly adversarial. And the reason for that, we'll talk about in just a second, but I just want to throw some stats at you, right? So over 7,000 malicious new dApps are deployed every single week, right? Over $1.8 billion have been stolen through various different hacks across the industry over the past couple of years. And 17% of losses are attributed to nation-state actors. Now, the onslaught is constant and it's massive, right? We see attacks in the hundreds of millions of dollars and no one even bats an eye, right? These things happen on a bi-monthly basis and it's practically only a matter of time until the next one happens. And the reason all of this takes place across our industry is that stealing money is bigger than stealing data, right? Attackers are financially motivated and their goals are ultimately to make a profit by performing the types of different attacks that they do. And so that's why a lot of these attackers look to kind of start with doing things in Web3 because they know that the time to value is instant. If we kind of look at the attack lifecycle that a lot of these different kind of threat actors think through, so when they go and attack some company or some organization in Web2, ultimately, they develop an exploit. That exploit requires them to go and install malware. They need to access and exfiltrate data. They maybe, create some sort of ransomware or some sort of ransom. They maybe sell that data, and only then do they kind of generate a profit. That takes a lot of time, takes a lot of manpower, and is ultimately very, very inefficient when there's an alternative for attackers that they can just find an exploit and create money, right? And that's ultimately the world that we live in when we talk about applications that are built in crypto. And so as the industry grows, because of these kind of problems, security challenges increase as well, right? And blockchains are growing at a significant pace, right? When we look at just the past 6 months, more tokens have been deployed on various different L2s on Ethereum than in Ethereum in its whole existence, right? And so those more tokens result in, more malicious tokens, for example, right? Those applications result in more smart contract exploits. Those applications result in more transactions and more malicious transactions and more malicious dApps. And when we look at the different types of challenges, right, there's attacks in the hundreds of millions of dollars across various different smart contracts that take place every single month or so. There's malicious transactions that are signed by unsuspecting exchanges or users because of a lack of different tooling that allows them to understand what it is they're signing or taking place, right? For example, the Wazir exploit that took place just a couple of months ago, where ultimately over $200 million were lost to a nation-state actor because of signing malicious transactions. And when we look at various different kind of tokens, right, that we said are growing at an impeccable rate, we see different types of honeypots, right, different types of scams, right? I'm sure all of you have seen wallets that look like this with tons of spam in them. You've probably seen, various different tokens listed on all sorts of dexes, and you can't tell the difference between which one is real and which one is fake. And hopefully none of you have interacted with any kind of rug, but that happens too, unfortunately. Wallet drainers are another major kind of problem across the space, right? Determining which site is real and which site is fake, if you're minting into a legitimate NFT or if you're not. And these attackers go and replicate the brands of some of the most popular sites in the space at record paces, right? We'll see new launches taking place, and seconds later, tweets or emails or other kinds of threads taking place and doing these things. And attackers even compromise legitimate websites, right? Just last night, the Athana.fi website was compromised by one of the largest kind of drainer groups across the industry, and ultimately had compromised many different users. And so we take a different kind of approach to some of the different kind of existing security or infrastructure players across the space, right? And the way that we see it is that ultimately it's important to secure kind of the infrastructure layer, and existing players have done so through custody or kind of compliance. But when you look at the application layer, there's all sorts of different scams, smart contract exploits, asset theft, and things like that. And that's where Blockaid kind of plays. And so some of these different threats that we talked about affect our customers in all sorts of different ways, right? One of these ways is in insane kind of lawsuits and legal fees, right? Some of our customers have been in the scope of various different lawsuits that ultimately result in millions of dollars and affect their users and their businesses in kind of unexplainable ways. And so the key that we kind of look to kind of solving a lot of these different things is detecting kind of exploits and detecting various different scams before they actually take place, right? And not after, right? Ultimately preventing these types of lawsuits or kind of tragedies from happening to our customers, but more importantly, their users. And so, we cover a lot of the different threats across the space, right? Whether those are malicious dApps, malicious transactions, tokens, smart contract exploits, and all in one kind of holistic platform, which is really critical to kind of finding an end-to-end kind of solution to some of the problems that we talked about. And the results are pretty phenomenal, right? So like we said, we work with some of the biggest wallets across the space, MetaMask to mention one, right? So we scan over hundreds of millions of transactions every single month, of those finding hundreds of thousands of malicious transactions, and ultimately protecting hundreds of millions of dollars from being lost every single month just for MetaMask alone. We do the same for Coinbase, right? And so in just a couple of months since launching, right, we've been able to protect over $75 million worth of assets across their user base. And with OpenSea, we've had amazing success as well, right? They'd seen hundreds of different malicious NFTs being launched across their platform, some by even sophisticated nation-state actors. And ultimately, after deploying Blockaid, those threats have gone down so significantly that ultimately, we've been able to kind of push those attackers off their platform and into other kind of NFT marketplaces. And in fact, the results are so significant that when we look at kind of various different threat intelligence signals at these different threat actors, Inferno Drainer being one of them, which is a massive kind of business, right? Inferno Drainer is actually one of the biggest kind of companies operating in crypto, right? Generating close to $100 million run rate every single year. We've been able to actually, shut them down and make their life so significantly harder that they ultimately said, hey, we're going to move to some other place and target other kinds of users. And so that's just one example of how kind of applying these types of security measures across various different wallets or protocols or applications across the space can make meaningful impact, right? This is a company that had stolen, this is a threat actor that had stolen $80 million a year from various different users. Ultimately, we've been able to shut them down and move them to a different kind of, and move them to perform kind of, their operations in various different places. And so that's kind of a brief overview about some of the work we've been doing across the industry and with many different partners. This is some of our contact details. You can check us out online and reach out if you have any kind of questions. Thank you.